8 years, millions of dollars, the world's best doctors, all of them failed. The son of Massachusetts's wealthiest man had never heard a single sound since the day he was born. He lived in complete silence, and his father tried everything: Geneva, Tokyo, Johns Hopkins, the best specialists money could buy, doctors charging thousands per hour. Every single one said the same thing: "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." But then, a maid arrived. Nobody at the Sterling mansion knew who Grace Williams really was. They saw a simple maid, quiet, humble, just trying to pay her bills. But what they didn't know, Grace had spent 6 years saving lives in combat zones: Army combat medic, Iraq, Afghanistan, field hospitals where she'd seen things most doctors only read about in textbooks. And when every million-dollar specialist failed, her battlefield training would save a boy's life, because Grace saw something deep inside little Noah's ear. Something nobody else noticed, something that was stealing his hearing. And what she found will leave you speechless. This story didn't find you by accident. Before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, get ready for a story about how a former soldier acted on faith and opened the door to a miracle. The Sterling mansion sat on 50 acres of land in one of Massachusetts's wealthiest suburbs. From the outside, it looked like a dream: Georgian columns, massive windows sparkling in the sunlight, perfectly manicured gardens, sculptures, fountains, world-class wealth. But inside, silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind that feels like rest. This silence was heavy, dense, like something had died and nobody had buried it. The servants moved through the hallways without speaking, their footsteps soft, careful. They'd quickly learned that Mr. Sterling preferred silence. In this house, no music played, no television hummed, no laughter bounced off the walls. Just silence. And somewhere in that silence, a father was mourning. Richard Sterling spent most evenings in his study, staring at the family portrait above the fireplace. There she was, Elizabeth, his wife, her smile frozen in oil paint, her eyes still bright, still alive. Next to her, a younger version of himself, looking hopeful, looking whole. And between them, Noah, 3 years old in the portrait, before Richard understood that his son would never hear his mother's name. Elizabeth died on Noah's birthday. Complications, the doctors called it. Too much blood, too little time. Richard held her hand as the light left her eyes. Elizabeth tried to say something. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, just like their son. Richard never forgave himself. Maybe if he'd chosen a different hospital, maybe if he'd demanded better care, maybe if he'd paid more attention, maybe Elizabeth would still be here, maybe Noah would be different. The guilt sat on his chest like a stone he couldn't lift. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He spent money. Millions of dollars, the world's best specialists, flights across oceans, hotels that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. Every doctor said the same thing: "Your son's deafness is congenital. There's nothing we can do. You need to accept it." Accept it? How could he accept that his boy would live in silence forever? That Noah would never hear his father say, "I wish your mother was here." So Richard kept searching, kept writing checks, kept hoping that somewhere out there, someone had an answer. He didn't understand that the answer wouldn't come from a specialist. It would come from someone he'd never look at twice, from someone who'd worn a different uniform 8 years ago. Her name was Grace Williams, and she was about to change everything. Grace Williams wasn't always a maid. 6 years ago, she wore a different uniform. Army combat medic, Specialist Williams, that's what they called her. Iraq, Afghanistan, field hospitals where every second mattered, where she learned to make life or death decisions with steady hands, where she saw injuries that would make civilian doctors faint, but nobody at the Sterling mansion knew that. When her grandmother got sick, Grace left the service. Honorable discharge, battlefield medals packed away in a box she never opened. Now she cleaned floors, folded laundry, kept her head down, the skills that once saved soldiers' lives, hidden, forgotten, until they weren't. It was a Tuesday morning in October. Grace stood at the Sterling mansion's gate. Head housekeeper Mrs. Patterson met her at the door, stern face, sharp gaze, a woman who noticed everything and forgave nothing. "You're Grace, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am." "You'll clean. You'll be quiet. You'll stay out of the way. Mr. Sterling doesn't like interference, especially around his son. Grace nodded. The military discipline was still there. Understood, ma'am. Understood? Because the last girl didn't understand. She tried to befriend the boy, thought she could help. She was fired within a week. Grace swallowed. I'm just here to do my job, ma'am. Mrs. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Follow me. As they walked through the mansion, Grace kept her eyes down. But she couldn't help noticing things, the silence, so thick it felt alive, how the other servants moved without speaking, without smiling, the weight that hung in the air. And then she saw him. A small boy sitting on the marble staircase, lining up toy cars in perfect rows. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge anyone. His shoulders were hunched, his movements careful, precise. But what caught Grace's attention was something different, how he kept touching his right ear, just briefly, almost like a habit, and the tiny grimaces that crossed his face every time he did. Grace's chest tightened. She'd seen that look before. Kandahar, on the face of a young soldier with shrapnel lodged deep in his ear canal. She said nothing, just kept walking, but her heart whispered something she couldn't ignore. Pay attention. Days passed. Grace cleaned floors, wiped windows, folded laundry. She kept her head down like Mrs. Patterson said, but she couldn't stop watching Noah. Every morning, the same routine. The boy sat alone in the sunroom, surrounded by model airplanes and puzzle pieces. His world was small, limited, safe. Nobody bothered him there. The other servants avoided him, not out of cruelty, out of fear, like his silence was something they could catch. Some whispered that the boy was cursed, that losing his mother at birth had taken his hearing with her. Superstition. That's what it was. But Grace saw something different. She saw a child who was desperately lonely, a boy who sat by windows and pressed his small hand to the glass, watching the world move without him. She saw how he looked at his father when Richard walked past without stopping, and how his small shoulders dropped a little lower. She saw how he touched his ear again and again, wincing each time, and nobody noticed, or maybe they'd stopped noticing long ago. Grace did something, a small thing. One day she saw Noah struggling with a wing on a model airplane. His small fingers couldn't get the piece to fit. Frustration creased his face. Grace shouldn't have interfered. Mrs. Patterson's warning echoed in her mind, but she couldn't stop herself. She knelt down and gently took the wing, clicked it into place with a soft snap. Noah looked at her. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then something happened. The tiniest smile, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. Grace's heart broke in half. She smiled back, gave him a little wave. He waved back. That night, Grace lay in bed thinking about that wave, such a small thing, but it meant everything. The next morning, she left something on the stairs where Noah always sat, a folded paper bird. Simple, made from scrap paper she'd found in the kitchen. She didn't wait to see if he'd take it. But the next day, the bird was gone. In its place was a note, 2 words in uneven handwriting. Thank you. Grace pressed that note to her chest and closed her eyes. She whispered into the silence, Lord, let me help this child. Show me how. She didn't know it yet, but God was already answering, and the answer would cost her everything she had. Over the next few weeks, something changed. Grace and Noah developed their own language, small things, secret things. She left him candies wrapped in gold foil. He left her drawings of airplanes. Grace learned his signs, not the formal ones his tutors taught him, but the personal ones he'd invented himself. Tapping his chest twice meant he was happy. Pointing to the sky meant he was thinking about stars. Pressing both palms together meant he felt safe. And slowly he started using that last sign around her. Safe. Grace treasured that more than anything, but not everyone was happy. One evening, Mrs. Patterson cornered her in the kitchen. I've seen you with the boy. Grace's stomach dropped. Ma'am, Mrs. Patterson's voice was sharp as glass. I warned you. Mr. Sterling has a rule. Staff are not to get close to Noah. I'm not trying to cause trouble. He's just lonely. That's not your concern. Mrs. Patterson stepped closer. You're here to clean, not to mother this child, not to fix what can't be fixed. Grace bit her tongue. Fix what can't be fixed. That's what everyone said. Even here, even in the house where this boy lived, everyone had given up. If Mr. Sterling finds out you've been interfering, you'll be fired. No references, no second chances. Mrs. Patterson's eyes were cold. Think about that. She left. Her heels clicked on the floor like a countdown. That night, Grace sat on her bed, staring at the wall. She thought about her grandmother, about the bills, about the paycheck she desperately needed. She thought about Noah, his lonely eyes, his pain. Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in her mind. Fix what can't be fixed, but what if it could be fixed? What if everyone was wrong? The next morning came cold and quiet. Grace was sweeping the hallway when she heard it, a soft thud, then nothing. She stopped, listened. Another sound, like a muffled cry. Her heart jumped. She followed the sound to the garden door. And there was Noah, sitting on a stone bench, his small body hunched, both hands pressed tight against his right ear. His face was twisted in agony. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but no sound came from his mouth. He was crying in complete silence. Grace dropped the broom and ran. She knelt before him, her hands trembling. Noah, Noah, look at me. He opened his eyes, red, wet, full of pain. Grace carefully signed. Your ear? He nodded. More tears fell. Grace's chest felt like it was being crushed. Can I look? She signed gently. I'll be gentle, I promise. Noah hesitated. Fear flashed across his face, but then he leaned forward. Trust. This child, who'd been poked and prodded by doctors his entire life, trusted her. Grace swallowed hard. She carefully tilted his head toward the morning light and looked. And there it was, deep in his ear canal. Something dark, dense, glistening like a wet stone. Her breath stopped. This was bigger than before, clearer. How had all these doctors missed this? How had all these scans not caught this? Suddenly, Grace was back. Helmand Province, 2019, a soldier screaming, shrapnel deep in his ear canal, blood everywhere. Specialist Williams, we're losing him. Grace's hands had been steady then, no hesitation, just training. She'd removed the fragment, saved his hearing, saved his life. The doctors later said it was impossible, that she shouldn't have been able to do it in the field. But she had. Because sometimes you don't need a degree. You need steady hands and the courage to act. Grace's hands trembled now, not from fear, from recognition. She'd seen this before. She slowly signed to Noah. There's something in your ear. Something that shouldn't be there. His eyes widened. We need to tell your father. Panic exploded across his face. His hands moved fast, desperate. No, no doctors, please. They hurt me, always hurt, never help. Grace's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. She understood. 8 years of specialists, 8 years of procedures, 8 years of pain with no relief. He'd learned that help meant suffering. Grace took his small hands in hers, looked into his eyes. I will never hurt you, she whispered. Never. He looked at her, and slowly his breathing calmed. But the fear didn't leave his eyes. 3 days passed. Grace couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely think. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it, that dark mass lodged deep, blocking everything, and Noah's face, the pain, the silent tears. On the third night, she sat on the edge of her bed, Bible open on her lap. But the words blurred. All she could see was Marcus, her cousin, deaf for 6 years, written off by every doctor, until someone finally looked. One procedure, one moment of attention, and his world exploded with sound. Grace's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She knew what she'd seen in Noah's ear. She knew. But who was she? A maid, no education, no credentials, no right to touch this child. If she was wrong, if she hurt him, she'd go to prison. If she was right but Richard found out that she'd acted without permission, she'd lose everything, her job, her income, her grandmother's care. God, she whispered, her voice cracked. What do you want from me? Silence, just the ticking of the clock. She thought about her brother Daniel, dead at 14. He'd been sick for months, complaining of pain, but they couldn't afford doctors, couldn't afford help. Grace watched him fade, watched him struggle to breathe, watched him try to speak words that wouldn't come. He died in her arms, silent like Noah. She'd made herself a promise that day, made God a promise. Never again would she stand by while a child suffered. But this was different. This wasn't her brother. This was a billionaire's son, and she was nobody. Grace closed the Bible, stood up, walked to the window. The moon hung heavy outside, pouring silver light over the gardens. Somewhere in this mansion, a small boy was sleeping with pain and silence in his world, and she was the only one who'd noticed. The only one. God, she breathed, I'm scared. I'm so scared. But if this is what you're asking, her voice trailed off. She thought of her grandmother's words. God doesn't call the equipped baby. He equips the called. Grace wiped her eyes. She made her decision. Tomorrow. If Noah showed pain again, she would act. She would trust what God had shown her, even if it cost her everything. She climbed into bed, her heart pounding. Sleep wouldn't come, but peace did. Strange, heavy peace. The kind that comes when you've decided to jump off a cliff and trust that God will catch you. Tomorrow came, and with it, the moment that would change everything. The next evening came too fast. Richard wasn't home. Business trip. The house was quiet. Grace was folding laundry in the hallway when she heard it. Thud. Her heart stopped. She ran toward the sound. Noah was lying on the hallway floor, curled up, both hands pressed to his ear, face twisted in agony, tears streaming down his cheeks. Silent tears. Grace dropped to her knees beside him. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. She carefully tilted his head toward the lamplight. The dark mass was clearly visible now, swollen, pressing against his ear canal. Her hands trembled. This was it. The moment. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the sterilized forceps she'd taken from the first aid kit 3 days ago, just in case. Her breathing came in short bursts. God, she whispered, guide my hands, please. Noah looked at her, eyes wide, scared but trusting. I won't hurt you, she signed with one hand. I promise. He slowly nodded. Grace knelt beside Noah. The training kicked in, automatic, instinctive. She'd done this 100 times in worse conditions, in sandstorms, under fire, with soldiers bleeding out. This was quiet, safe, controlled. Breathe, Williams, she whispered to herself. Old habit, battlefield calm. Her hands moved with surgical precision. Angle the forceps, 15 degrees, steady pressure, just like removing shrapnel, just like saving Corporal Martinez in Kandahar. She could hear her old instructor's voice. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, fast is deadly accurate. Grace moved slowly, steady, professional. The blockage resisted. She adjusted, 0.5 millimeter, pulled again, release. Something slid free. It landed in her palm, dark, wet, years of buildup that had stolen his hearing. Grace stared at it, her stomach turned, but before she could react, Noah gasped, a real gasp, audible, loud. His hand flew to his ear. His eyes went wider than she'd ever seen them. He suddenly sat up, looking around the hallway like he'd never seen it before. Then he pointed at the grandfather clock on the wall, the clock that had ticked his entire life, the clock he'd never heard. His mouth opened. A sound came out, rough, broken, unpracticed, but real. Tick-tock, he whispered. Grace's tears fell. Yes, sweetheart, that's the clock. You can hear it. Noah's whole body shook. He touched his throat, feeling the vibration of his own voice. His eyes filled with wonder and fear and something else. Hope. His mouth opened again. One word. The first real word he'd ever spoken. Dad, Grace sobbed. She pulled him close, held him as he trembled, held him as sounds flooded his world for the first time in 8 years. You can hear, she whispered into his hair. Thank you, Jesus. You can hear. Noah clung to her, and then footsteps, heavy, fast, coming down the hallway. Grace looked up. Richard Sterling stood in the doorway, face white as death, eyes locked on his son, on the floor, and on the blood on Grace's hands. What did you do? Richard's voice shook the walls. He lunged forward, shoved Grace aside, grabbed Noah by the shoulders. What did she do to you? Noah flinched at the sound, so loud, so harsh. But then his mouth opened. Dad, I can hear you. Richard froze. His entire body went rigid. What? Noah reached up and touched his father's face. Your voice, he whispered. This is your voice. Richard's legs buckled, but before the moment could breathe, before he could understand what was happening, his eyes fell on Grace's hands. Blood, forceps, the dark mass lying in her palm. Horror replaced wonder. Security, he roared. Now! 2 security guards appeared instantly. Get her away from my son. Grace's heart shattered. Sir, please, listen to me. I didn't hurt him. I helped him. Look. She held out her palm, showed him the blockage. This was in his ear. That's why he couldn't hear. I removed it. "You're not a doctor," Richard snarled. "You could have killed him." The guards grabbed Grace's arms. Noah screamed, actually screamed. "No, don't take her." The sound of his son's voice, loud, desperate, real, stopped Richard. But fear was too strong. "Take her to the security office. Call the police." Grace didn't resist as the guards led her away. She looked at Noah. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." Noah sobbed, loudly, messily. Audible tears for the first time in his life. And that sound of anguish echoed through the hallway, for the first time. At the hospital, doctors surrounded Noah. Tests, scans, examinations. Richard paced the hallway, his mind spinning. His son was talking, hearing, responding to sounds. This was impossible. A nurse approached him. "Mr. Sterling, the doctor needs to speak with you urgently." Richard followed her to a small office. Dr. Matthews sat behind the desk. His face was grim. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know how to say this." "Just say it." The doctor slid a file across the desk. "This is your son's scan from 3 years ago." Richard opened it. There, circled in red, was a note. "Dense cerumen impaction noted in right ear canal. Immediate removal recommended." Richard's blood turned to ice. "Someone saw this?" Dr. Matthews slowly nodded. "It appears so. But there's no follow-up, no procedure scheduled. Your file was marked as ongoing treatment protocol." The words hit Richard like a bullet. Ongoing treatment protocol. They knew. They'd seen the blockage, and they'd left it there. Because his money was too good. Because his desperation was profitable. "They kept my son deaf," Richard whispered, "on purpose." Dr. Matthews said nothing, but his silence said everything. Richard's hands shook. All these years, all those millions, all those specialists shaking their heads, they lied, and the only person who told the truth, who actually helped, was sitting in his security office waiting to be arrested. Richard stood up. "Where are you going?" the doctor asked. Richard didn't answer. He had a maid to find, and a lifetime of apologies to make. Grace sat alone in the security office, hands folded, head bowed. She wasn't praying for herself. She was praying for Noah, that his hearing would last, that his father would understand, that the boy would finally know what it's like to live in a world full of sound. The door opened. She looked up. Richard Sterling stood there. But this wasn't the same man who dragged her away an hour ago. His eyes were red. His face was broken. He looked like a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse and rebuild itself in a single moment. "Grace," her name spoken softly, almost reverently. She stood. "Mr. Sterling, I can explain." "No." He walked slowly toward her. "Don't explain. Don't apologize. Don't say a word." He stopped in front of her, and this billionaire, this man who controlled empires, dropped to his knees. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Grace's breath caught. "The doctors knew," Richard said. His voice trembled. "They saw the blockage years ago. They left it there. Because my money was too good to cure." Tears ran down his face. "I trusted them. I trusted the diplomas, the degrees, the expensive hospitals. I spent millions on my son's problem and never once stopped to actually look at him." He looked at her. "But you did. You saw him. You saw his pain. You paid attention when nobody else bothered." Grace's own tears fell. "I just loved him, sir. That's all." Richard shook his head. "No, that's not all." He slowly stood. "For 8 years I tried to buy a miracle, and God sent it through a woman I hired to clean my floors." Grace wiped her eyes. "God uses the willing, Mr. Sterling. That's what my grandmother always said." Richard nodded. She was right. Together they returned to Noah's hospital room. The boy sat on the bed, headphones on his ears, listening to music for the first time. His face was pure wonder. When he saw them, he pulled off the headphones and ran straight to Grace. He wrapped his arms around her waist. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, unpracticed, beautiful. Grace knelt down and hugged him tight. "You were always worthy of hearing, sweetheart. Always." Noah stepped back and looked at his father. "Dad, I can hear your heart. It's beating fast." Richard dropped to his knees and pulled his son to him. For the first time in 8 years, Noah heard his father cry. And Grace, standing quietly beside them, finally let herself breathe. God had answered her prayer, not with money, not with medicine, with willing hands and a faithful heart. Sometimes that's all a miracle needs. 3 months later, Grace wasn't working at the Sterling Mansion anymore, but she visited every week. Richard had moved her grandmother to the finest care facility, paid for everything, and he did something else for Grace. He offered her a full-time position, not as a maid, as Noah's personal medical consultant, because Richard had learned something. The most important qualifications don't come with a diploma. They come with a heart. And Grace Williams, former Army combat medic, a current miracle worker, had both. Noah's older now, 16, honor roll, plays piano. And every night before bed, his grandmother tells him, "Did you thank Grace today?" Because some people come into your life once and change everything. If this story touched you, hit the like button and subscribe for more amazing stories. And tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone with a hidden past? Thanks for watching.